Hey, what's up YouTube? My name is Brett Westwood, and today I'm going to show you how you could use authentication inside of your Next.js 13 project using NextAuth. We are going to use three providers that NextAuth allows us to use. One is going to be the credentials provider, which allows us to use our username or email and password to sign in and authenticate an account. The other two will be the Google provider and the Github provider. There is one caveat though with the credentials provider, and that is it doesn't actually register a user. All it does is authenticate users. So what we need to do is we need to create a register API endpoint inside of Next.js 13, which we will do inside of this tutorial. After we get all of these users authenticated, they will be sent to a database, and we are going to use MongoDB for doing that. And we're going to connect our database to our application using Prisma. So if you want to learn how to create a fully functional login and register page, just stay tuned, watch the rest of this tutorial, and you should be able to do it at the end of this tutorial. Also, before we get started, if you could hit that like button and also subscribe if you want more content similar to this, that would be amazing. So no further ado, let's get started and let's jump right into the code. First thing first is we need to set up the environment for our Next.js 13 project. So to do that, we are going to open up our command terminal on our system, and we are going to change directories into wherever you keep all of your projects. If you don't keep your projects in a specific directory, you can just use your desktop. So after we're in the specific directory we want to use, we need to open up a Google Chrome tab, and you're going to be on Next.js docs. And for these Next.js docs, we are going to be on the installation tab, and we are going to copy this command npx create-next-app at latest. So we're going to copy that, go into our terminal, paste it, and then we have to give the project a name. So I am just going to put YouTube Next Auth. Press enter. Then it's going to prompt you to a few questions before we get started. TypeScript, no. ESLint, no. Tailwind CSS, yes. The source directory, no. The app router, yes. And the default import alias, no. It's going to initialize the project, and it's going to install all the dependencies necessary for Next.js. This should take about 15 seconds, and after this is done, we're going to change directories back in to our project. So I called it YouTube-NextAuth, and then we're going to do the shortcut code dot to open up my text editor, which is VS Code. We are going to close this command terminal, open up the project right here, which this is a boilerplate Next.js 13 application. I am using version 13.4.2 in this tutorial. I'm just going to go over quickly what these folders are. So the app folder is the main folder we're in. This page.js folder is your home page. So we are going to go inside of it. We can remove this image import and remove everything inside of the main tag, including the main tag. We are just going to create a section element, and inside of it we'll have an H1 saying home. Perfect. Now we're going to go inside the global CSS. The global CSS, we're going to move lines 5 through 27, and we'll keep lines 1 to 3 because we are going to use Tailwind CSS for this application. The layout file is the file for the root layout. This is going to apply to all the pages in your application, which is referred to as the children. This is where you can import your next font Googles. This is where you import the global CSS, and this is where you can have metadata for your whole application. After we're done with this, we are going to organize the project a little better. We are going to create two main folders. The first one is going to be the API folder. This is where we're going to have NextAuth, and we're going to have all of our backend routes inside of. And then we also are going to create a folder inside the app called parentheses site. So this means that this is where all of our client-side facing pages are going to be. This does not include, so I'll explain how the routing works in Next.js. It is a little different than a React application. So for example, inside of the site, I'm going to create a new folder called register. Register is going to be considered a page route. So it is going to be localhost 3000/register. That will be the page. And to write the code for this register directory, you have to create a file inside of the directory called page.jsx. And then I'm going to create a login page as well, so I'm going to have a folder called login. And then we'll have a new file called page.jsx inside of the login. So technically now we have two client-side facing pages named login and register, and then a third one too if you include the home page. So I am just going to open up my terminal real quick and run npm run dev. This is going to start my localhost 3000. I'll open it up. And I will just show you, for example, what is going on. So the home page is localhost 3000. If we go to /login, it should be empty, but it doesn't give us an error. So if I go to like /h, it will give us this page cannot be found. So the login and register page are there, but there's just no content on it. So now that we've set up our environment and our application, we are ready to set up Prisma so we can connect our MongoDB database. So to connect our MongoDB database to our Next.js 13 application, we need to use Prism. So we're going to set up Prism right now. So we do have our development server running, so let's stop it by pressing Control-C. And we need to install a package, which is a dev dependency. It's going to be our first package, and it's called Prism. So we need Prism to connect the database. After we install it, we need to initialize it. So it's going to be npx prism init. So that means two things happen. Well, more than two things, but two things that you could see. So you're going to see it created a Prism directory right here, and inside of it has a schema.prisma, and it also created an environment file right here, .env. So let's just go inside the schema.prism real quick. And we have, first off, there is blue and green text in different colors. So if your text doesn't look like this, it's because you need to download the extension Prism. So we have the Prism extension. It has 832,000 downloads, and it adds syntax highlighting, formatting, auto-completion, jump to definition, and lidding for Prism files. This is very useful if we are going to use Prism, so I highly recommend you get this extension on your text editor. Next thing we are going to do is we are going to go inside the schema.prism, and we are going to change the default provider, which is the Postgres SQL, to a MongoDB. And then the database connection URL string is in the env file under the value database underscore URL. So if you go to this, it is right there. This is our default string that has no use to us. So that means we need to create our own string from MongoDB by creating a collection. So to do that, we are going to open up a Google Chrome tab, go to Google, go to MongoDB. It should be the first search result. And then we're either going to sign in or sign up in an account. I'm going to sign in using the Google Provider. So we're just going to sign in. Your page looks something like this. At the top left, there's a drop down. You click it and then you click New Project. So for the project name, I am just going to name it what my project is called. You can name it whatever you want. So YouTube Next Auth. We're going to click Next. We don't need to add any members or set permissions, so we're just going to click Create Project. This is going to create the project, and then now we're going to have to build a database. So we're going to build the database. We're going to select the free version. The provider is AWS. The recommended region is going to be whatever it is with the star. And then your cluster name, you could leave it as default, or you could change it to whatever you want, but it is only server side, so no client is actually going to see it. So we're going to click Create, and the most important part is this username and password. So I'm just going to use the username, and then the password, you could have whatever password you want, but I'm going to keep the one that they gave me. I'm going to copy it, open up my notepad, paste it in my notepad because we're going to need this for later. And then we're going to create the user. So it shows the user created right here. You're going to use your local environment, and then you're going to use your IP address, or if you want any IP address to have access to this database, you press 0.0.0.0/0, and any IP address can access this database as long as they're logged into your account. We're just going to click Finish and Close. And then we're going to click go to database. And this could be instant or this could take a few minutes. And this is going to create your cluster and your collections. Mine is already created because it says status is active and it's green. Now we're going to connect the database by using the database connection string. We're going to click connect and we're going to click MongoDB for VS Code. It's going to give us this connection string right here. We're going to press copy. We're going to go back to our VS Code. We are going to paste that string right here. And then we're going to add a test at the end. So it's going to be mongodb.net/test. And then in the password with the greater than and less than sign, we need to replace it with the password in our notepad. If you don't do this, you're not going to be able to successfully connect to your database. So now we are technically successfully connected to MongoDB. We could go close this and we can leave this page open for now. And now we are ready to actually start creating schemas in our schema.prisma file. So we are going to create two schemas. One is going to be a user model and the other is going to be an account model. So the difference is that we are all going everybody's going to be sent to the user model, even if you sign up with the account either through Google or through GitHub. We need the account model because, like I said, we are using the providers of Google and GitHub. So we need that. And we are going to use a relation to connect these two models, a relation of one to many. So I'm just going to copy and paste these schemas inside of my code editor below. And I'll explain exactly what's in it. So we're going to copy, paste. So right here, I connected a user schema right here. Every user is going to have an ID of string. And this string right here has a decorator attached to it. This decorator is straight from the Prisma docs. And this is what you have to use for the MongoDB database. We're also going to have a name, an email verified, image. We're going to have a hashed password because we do have to hash passwords before we send them to a database. Created that, updated that, and we're going to have the accounts. And these accounts are going to come from the account model. That's what it means. So anytime somebody gets a GitHub Provider logged in, it's going to still be in one specific database, so it's easier for us to see. And like I said, we have a relation. The relation here is in the account. The account is in relation to this user model right here. And it's going to take in consideration the user ID right here and the reference each ID to make sure they match up. So that is how we're going to connect and how we're defining types inside of our database using Prism. If you do want more information on this stuff, I will link the Prism docs below inside the description. We want to access Prism globally as well on the client side, so we do have to get a package onto our application. So we're going to install the @prisma/client package. So when you do this, there's two ways you could do it. You could do Prisma Client globally in one file and then just import it from that file, or you could just initialize Prisma on the top of every file that needs Prisma. So the reason why you would need Prisma on the front end or on any of your code on the server side is because it gives you different methods and functions that allow useful transactions. So we are going to actually create a lib folder. It's going to be libs. And then inside this libs folder is where we're going to initialize the Prisma client and we're going to make it a global state. So we could use it in any file we need as long as we import it from the libs folder. So we're going to have prisma db.jsx and we have to import the Prisma client. We're going to call client global this dot Prisma, or we're going to initialize it with the new Prisma client function. And then we're going to say if the process dot environment variable, like the node environment, is in production, not development. If it's in production, the environment, which means that we're pushing it to production, the whole application, we are going to use the global this dot Prisma for the client. And now all we have to do is export default client. So like I said, if we want to use the Prisma client in any of the folders, we just got to import it from this export. Okay, so now we are finally ready to install packages from NextAuth. So I'm going to install 2 packages off the bat. So we're going to have next-auth at latest. And then we're also going to have a Prism adapter. So this is going to be next-auth/prism-adapter. So we're going to install these 2 packages. NextAuth at latest is the main package that allows us to use the authentication that NextAuth provides. And the Prism adapter allows us to connect Prism and the database to NextAuth. So to make sure these packages are installed, you can just go to the package JSON. We have everything installed with the versions I'm using. I'm just going to close this tab, close a few more tabs that I'm not using just to clean things up. And now we have to create a main entry point for this NextAuth to allow it to be on our project. So to do that, we are going to create another folder in the API called auth, and then we are going to create a catch-all API route, and it's going to be a bracket ..next auth and then close bracket. And then this will have a file underneath it called route.jsx. So this route.jsx file is, like I said, the main entry point for our NextAuth application. So there's a few things we have to import before you even start typing any code. So we have to import NextAuth. That's the first thing. Next, we want to import Prism, and that is from that global lib file we just created from ../libs/prismdb. We also want to import the Prism adapter. Then, like I said, we are using 3 providers that allow for authentication: the credentials, the Google provider, and the GitHub provider. So we need to import those as well. Okay, so now we have all the imports ready to go. Now we can actually start coding this entry point for NextAuth. So we are going to create some auth options. And these auth options, they give us different properties that we can use to make our authentication process a lot more efficient, smooth, and clean. So the first thing I'm going to do as a property is the adapters. I'm going to define the adapters. Or the adapter, my fault. The adapter. So it's the Prism adapter, and it's taken in the Prism globally. So that's the first thing we're going to do. And then we have to define the providers. So it doesn't know what providers we're using, so we have to tell it what providers we want to use. So first one I could do is I could do the GitHub provider. And the GitHub provider takes in an object with the client ID and the client secret. We're going to get these values later. But for now, we are also going to send all of these values to the env file because these should not be client side facing. After that, we are going to have the Google provider, and it is going to have another object with the client ID and the client secret as well. And like I said, we will get these values later on in the tutorial. Another one we are going to do, the last provider, is the credentials provider. This is the most complex provider to actually code. So that's why I'm leaving it right here at the bottom. So the credentials provider first takes in a name, and we have to name it. So we're going to name it credentials. That's what the docs say, and that's what most people do. And then in the credentials, we're going to have an object. And then inside of this object, we are going to have different labels that we need to fill out. So these different labels we're going to fill out, I'm going to have an email, and then the email is going to be defined with a label type, and we could have a placeholder, not necessary. We're going to have a password. We have a label, and the type is going to be password, and then we'll have a username, and then it'll be a label, type, and a placeholder as well. So we could close this. And then right below this, we are going to have the async authorize, and it's going to be a function which is going to be the authorization and authentication logic of the credentials provider. So for now, we are going to do this. So I'll type this out first and explain what we're doing. So we are going to create a user because we don't have the register API endpoint created yet. So we have no registered users. So technically, we have to hard code a user inside of the logic part of the code, which is right here. So we're going to say const user equals, and then it's going to have an ID, a name, and then we can give it an email. Brett@gmail.com, which is not my email, so you could try to email if you want, but that's not going to get to me. So we have a name and an email and an ID. So this is a user I just created. This is dummy data. And all we have to do is return this user. The reason why I am doing this is because NextAuth actually gives us a pre-built login page to test out our code before we actually start creating the register API and not everything works. So that's why I'm doing this like I am now. So we are going to close the credentials provider. And then we could go outside of this array. And outside of this array, we are going to have a few more properties that I want to call. So one that is required is going to be the secret. So we need a secret, and the reason why we need a secret is because it helps encrypt the JWT tokens. So this secret should be on the env file as well. We're going to have to create that now. So secret equals, it's going to be a string, and they could just be whatever. It should be something hard to guess. So there is my secret. I'll close the env file. And then the next option I want inside of the auth options is going to be the session. Our session is going to have that strategy of JWT. That's how we're going to encode all of our stuff through JSON Web Tokens. And then after that option, we are going to have one more option, and this is going to be debug. So debug is a pretty simple option that we're going to use here in the auth options. It is going to help us when we're in development, and it's going to give us errors specified in NextAuth. So if we're messing up anywhere in the NextAuth code, this will pull up in this terminal right here and tell us exactly what we're doing wrong. So that's why it is definitely useful to have this right here. Okay, and then the final thing we have to do is we have to export these auth options, but we have to export them in a certain way. So we have to export them as handlers, and we have to pass them through the NextAuth package. So we have all the auth options passed inside this NextAuth inside of this specific variable. And we have to export the handler, but you just can't export handlers like this, export default handler. The reason why is because we are in a route file in the API of Next.js. If you're in any route files in Next.js, you must export them either by an HTTP request. So like a post request or a GET request or a put request. It has to be exported like that. So we are going to type export with an object, handler as GET, handler as post, because we are only using GET and post request inside of this catch-all route. Okay, so now I want to make sure all of this code is working, and like I said, NextAuth provides a pre-built login page, and we are going to test out to make sure we are returning this specific user, like this code says right here. So we are going to run the development server, npm run dev, open up localhost 3000, and the path for this pre-built sign-in page is going to be /API/auth/signin. And here is this pre-built login page that is specific to NextAuth. The sign-in with Google and sign-in with GitHub isn't set up yet, even though it's showing because we added them in the providers option. But we don't have the keys, so this would not work. It's going to throw an error. The sign in with credentials, though, however, should work, and it's only going to return that user that we hard-coded in the async authorized credentials function. So I could type in anything I want here, and then this, and then I'm going to inspect the page before I submit it, and we are going to go to the network tab. And then when we submit it, we should get a 302, which means a return and found content. So perfect. So now we have a credentials of 302 with the request method of post. And it's shown us the request URL. It's shown the payload that I typed in. And it sent us to a login page. Okay, now we also could look at the application tab. And if you look at this, it gave us a session token right here. So this session token is what's going to give us that session data that we could use to show the user's name, email, whatever information you want to show to the client that they signed up with, you can show through here. And you're going to have to be able to access this session token. And there's going to be 2 ways you could access this session token that I'm about to show you. Okay, so there's 2 ways to get session data, and that is through server-side or client-side rendering. So server-side rendering means you're just going to get the information quicker. You could do either way you want, whatever you prefer, but for this project too, I'm going to do client-side, but I'm going to quickly show you how you could do both real quick. So technically, we are logged in because of these tokens, and we refresh the page that the tokens are still here. So we are going to do a server-side render real quick. I am going to open this up real quick right here. We are on the home page. We need to import a few things from NextAuth to do a session side render. So we're going to say get server session, and this is from Next-Auth. And then we are going to create a session, const session, and this is going to equal wait. That means we need a asynchronous function. And this variable session is going to get the session server session. And it's going to take in the auth options, which is the backend code from that catch-all route, which will be auto-imported when you type. So now if you want to show it, you could have an H1 that says server-side rendered. And then we could do a JSON.stringify. So we'll just do JSON.stringify. And you're going to stringify the session. So now since we are logged in, we should get all the information on the home page. So if we go to localhost 3000, I'm going to remove this real quick. And there is the user that is hard-coded on our catch-all API route. Name Brett, email brett@gmail.com, and that is server-side rendered. Okay, so that is how you render server-side. How do you render client-side? So if you want to render client-side, is a little trickier, but it's not hard at all. The reason why is because Next.js 13, all pages by default are server-side rendered. So if you do want to render something client-side, like a use state, if you use any hooks, stuff like that, you need to put a use client tag at the top of that file. And we need to create a context folder. So this is where I'm going to have all of the providers and context for this project. And inside of that, we're going to create a file called authcontext.jsx. And then inside of this authcontext.jsx, we are going to initialize the session provider. So like I said, you have to mark this as use client if you're using any type of hooks or providers. So we're going to import the session provider. And this is going to be from NextAuth/React. Then we're going to export a default function called authContext, but I'm going to change the name to provider because this is what I'm going to use in the other files. We are going to return the session provider, and it's going to be wrapping all of the children. And then I just got to close this as well. And this file is complete. And the reason why I'm doing in this file, like I said before, is Next.js's docs recommend that you do any providers inside of a separate file. So I'm going to import this provider into layout. You should not do any layout. You should not do any provider functionality inside the layout. It needs to be separate. So I'm going to import the provider from the context/auth context, and I am going to wrap all the children with the provider. So just like this. So now I have access to the use session hook inside of my application, which will render a session data client side. So I'm going to show you exactly how I do that too. So to do that, we are going to create a folder for this purpose only called components. And inside it, we will call a file called user.jsx. We could just do a React functional component. And we are going to import the use session hook. And this is going to be from next-auth / I think it's React. Let me just make sure that's the correct. Yep. So it's from NextAuth / React. And if we want to use this session, which is we are going to call it like this. So we are calling the session by using the use session hook. And then if we want to show this off, we can just do a json.stringify again. json.stringify. And we're going to do this session. And now I just want to compare the two on the same page. We are going to get the user. I'm just going to capitalize this. We are going to get the user inside of our homepage, import user from the components. And then we're going to do a self-closing tag because we still want this page to be server-side rendered. So if we go over here, it says React context isn't available in server components. The reason why is because we did not do a use client on the top. So you see it does throw that error. I'm glad I actually did that error so to show you. So if you don't do a use client at the top when you're doing like a hook or a use session or any providers, you'll get an error thrown at you. I think I might have to restart the server. Let me restart it real quick. We are going to run the dev again, go to localhost 3000. It might have logged us out, but it looks like it didn't. So as you can see right there, this popped up maybe a second later. If you want to replay it, this popped up a second later, and this was technically the client side rendered. So let me just label real quick. H1 client side rendered. So if we go back to the page, it'll be more clear. So this is the server-side rendered session data, and this is the client-side rendered session data. If I refresh it, since it's already, I think, loaded, it might be at the same time, but we'll check it out. Nope, as you see, it takes about a second more, not even a second more, to render the client side. So the client side does take a little longer, but it does get the job done. Both of them do get the job done. And it's essentially the same thing, just using a different method. Okay, now that we're able to connect NextAuth successfully and show that we could log in a user with the pre-built page, and we could get the session data by using a client call or server-side call, now it's time for us to actually register our own user. So first thing first is I want to create the client-side register form. So I am going to minimize this API folder, and we are going to work in the site folder in the register page.jsx. So like I said earlier, this isn't a tutorial on Tailwind CSS. So we are going to use a Tailwind CSS, well, Tailwind UI template for a register form. So we are going to go on Google and we are going to go to Tailwind CSS. We can just go to the top right here, go to components, browse components. And then if we scroll down, we should be able to see a sign in and register form. So if we click code and then we make sure the down arrow is click to React, we can literally copy all of this code. And this is going to be for our register. And I'm using simple. So that is the format and it should look like this. So I'm going to minimize this, paste the code in here. We're going to scroll to the top and it has some comments. So it's telling us that we need to require a Tailwind CSS forms, and that is a package that Tailwind CSS requires us to download in our project. So we need to npm install at Tailwind CSS/forms. We're going to press enter. And now we have that package on our system, but now we need to implement it in the config file. So to do that, inside the plugins array bracket, we're going to press require, and then it's at Tailwind CSS/forms. So anytime you do changes in the config files or env files, you should reset your development server and restart it. But ours is currently not even on, so we're good to go. So we're going to remove this code, and we're going to move this comment. We don't need to do this comment at all. We are going to call the function register. We're going to change this to register your account, register for an account. And then if we do look at what the template looks like, we only have 2 fields. And we're actually requiring 3. We need a name, email, and password for the register portion of the client. So to do that, we need to just pretty much copy this whole div and paste it down again. And then just change a few fields. So the first field should be name, HTML4 name, ID name, it'll be name for name. The type is going to be text. We don't need an autocomplete. And I think everything else looks good. Let's just see if the UI looks good. And let's just change the button down here to register. Let's open up localhost 3000. We're going to get sent to the home page. See, we're still logged in. We're going to go to the register. So here's how our register page looks. Looks pretty nice, right? Real quick to make too. The only thing is it's not functional. We have no state. Like we could type an input, but we're not receiving any state. So that's the next step we need to do. So we need to mark this page as used client, since it is client side rendered, because we're using the use state hook. So the use state hook, we are going to get the values of all these inputs. So to do that, we need to initialize use state by data and set data. And that is going to equal an object with the initial values of name, which is empty string, email empty string, and password empty string. So we have that going for us now. And now we need to add the values and on changes in each input. So the value is going to be data.name because it's the data object with the property name. And then the on change is going to be setting the data from an anonymous function to the e.target.value. Now we need to do it for the email input, which is value equals data.email. And the on change is the set data exactly like that, except you just change this field right here. And this ... is the spread syntax for data. So it's showing all the data is the same, and we're just changing the email field. We're going to have the value here, data.password, and then we'll have the on change as well. So now all of our inputs should be we should be able to receive the state, but we're not doing anything with the state yet. So on the top of the form, right here where the form starts, we're going to remove the action and method, and we'll do an onSubmit. This onSubmit is going to point to a function called register user, which we haven't created yet. So we're going to create it right above the return. We're going to create an arrow function called register user, and it's going to take in the e.prevent default, and we're just going to close it for now. I like putting this in a parenthesis. So let me just shut down the terminal real quick, and we are going to install one package, which is going to be Axios. You could do an Axios request or a fetch request when calling data from the front end to the back end, and we will use Axios. So we're going to import Axios at the top here from Axios. And then now, before we even do Axios here, we actually do need to create a backend for this register API endpoint. Okay, so now we successfully set up the front end for the register when a user needs to register. Now we need to set up the backend API call for this register as well. So to do that, we want to install one package before we get started, and that's going to be bcrypt. Reason why we are installing bcrypt is because we want to hash passwords before we send them to a database. So now that we have the package installed onto our project, we are going to go inside the API folder, create a new folder called register, and then inside of the register, we're going to have a route.jsx. So now this is where all the backend API is going to be, and then the front end is going to call the backend, which is going to be here. So we are going to import bcrypt from bcrypt. We're also going to import Prism because we need to use some Prism functions and methods. And this is going to be from and we're importing it from the global lib file that we created earlier. And we also need next response, and this is specific to Next.js. And this allows us to send responses back to our client. So now we are going to create an asynchronous function, and we don't name functions like I said in routes, we just call them whatever the HTTP request is. So it's a post request, and it's a request taken as a parameter. And inside the code block, the first thing we need to define is the body. So the body is going to equal the request.json. Also, we want to destructure the body. So we're going to have a name, email, and password coming from the front end, which is going to equal the body. So now we destructured it. And now I want to do a few checks. So if they don't enter a name, email, or password, we want to make sure that we send a next response saying that there's missing fields. So to do that, we are going to do if no name or no email or password, we want to return a new next response saying missing fields, and then we want to give a status of 400. So that is the first check we are going to do inside of the backend to make sure they actually entered something in the inputs when they register. Next thing we want to check is we want to check to make sure that there is no user already associated with the email they're trying to register with. So for example, we are going to create a variable called exist, and we're going to await a prisma.user.findUnique. And this is going to take in an object, and this object is going to have a where, and then this object is going to be an email. So we're just checking against our database using Prism to make sure there's no email associated with the email they're trying to register with. That's all we're doing here in this code. So then right below it, we're going to say if exist is true. That means if there is an email that does match what they're trying to type in, we need to throw a new error. We need to stop them right there because we only one person can have one email. Each email has to be unique. So we're going to say email already exists. So there's that error. And then if they pass that check error, we need to hash their password. That means that their email is fine. The username was entered. Their name was entered. Their email isn't used by another user. So now we need to hash their password. So we're going to say hashed password. And then we're using bcrypt's function of hash. That means we're going to hash the password, which is the first parameter it takes, and the password, which is the string. And then this is the salt. The salt, you're going to put 10. This is just going to be the strength of the hash of the password. So after we do that, we hash the password. We need to now create the user in the database because we are registering the user. So we're going to use the prisma.user.create function. We are going to have the data object with a name, email, and password, which we don't need password here. We're just going to put hashed password. And we are going to close this object and make sure everything is closed properly. And then close that as well. And that allows us to create the user in our database. So after that step is done, we are good to go for the register function, and all we have to do is return that user. And returning the user with the next response .json and user. So that is going to be it for the register route. Now what we can do is we can actually test this route with the front end, but first we got to hook it up before we even test it, because I did stop in the front end before we actually finished all the code. So if we go back to the register page on the client side, inside of the register user function, we need to use Axios to do a post request to that specific endpoint we just created, and that is /API/register. And the reason why is because it's in the API folder and the register. So that is the path we're using. And then we are going to pass in the data. Data. And the data is whatever they enter, those on-change values. After that, we could do a .then. This is going to take in an arrow function. And this arrow function, for now, we could just do an alert saying user has been registered. And then we could do a .catch. And then we could do an alert saying an error occurred. So now we could test this out, and obviously if it works, we're going to get this alert. And it's going to also be registered into our database, the new user. So let's test this out real quick before we continue with anything else. So run the development server on localhost 3000. Just reload this to make sure everything's good. Nope. I did a minus sign, not equal. Okay, cool. So let's check the console, make sure we have no errors. So we're clear for the console. Let's type in brett@gmail.com. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll do as the password. We will inspect the page before we click the button. We will go to the network tab. And we'll see what requests we get, what status we get back. So we're going to click register, and an error occurred. So we obviously did something wrong. It says we are missing fields. So we could check back and see what we did, but it looks like we did type in everything, so we typed something wrong on our code. So let's minimize this. Go back to our register route, which is our backend. And we said if there is no name, no email, or there's no password, we're going to return next response missing field status 400. So let's look to make sure that looks good. No name, no email, no password, return new next response missing field status 400. Name, email, password, body, request.json. We didn't await it here. That's why. because if we don't await it, that means it's just going to keep going with the function. And even though this takes a few milliseconds, we need to await the request because it takes time to process to come to the backend. So let's try it again, and we shouldn't get an error now. So that's just like a quick debug real quick to make sure everything is working good. So you just go back, make sure you have the error codes and see what's going on. So we're going to go to refresh the page. I'll type in Brett. We'll do brett@gmail.com. And we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We'll click register. And this time the user has been registered. So we do get a 200 request. We have all of this information here. We have an ID created. We have all of the schema properties here created for this user. The updated at, we have the hashed password, the ID, the email verified. We have a post request of a 200 status, and it's requesting to the endpoint API/register. So now we could check our MongoDB. So let's just go into MongoDB and sign in real quick. And we're going to make sure that this user is actually in the database. So we are on the correct collection. We are going to browse the collection. It's going to be test/user, and we have a Brett and then Brett@gmail with the hash password and the ID. It's _ID. So everything works on the register API end and also on the client side as well. Now we are going to create the login client side page. We are literally going to do the same thing, and we're going to take a template from Tailwind CSS, which is the tailwind.ui. So if we go back to the tailwindui.com, we could literally just take the same sign-in form, not a big deal, copy all of the code again, minimize, paste it in the front end code. So we could close the API folder, make sure you're in this site login and then page JSX. We're going to paste it, remove the comments because we don't need them. And then at the top of the page, we need to use client. We need to tag it with the use client. Reason why is because we are going to use useState from React. And let's change the function name to login. We are going to initialize the useState by doing the variables data and set data. As an object, we're going to take in the email, and we're going to log in with the password. So that's what we're going to log in with. Now we need to add the values and on changes on the inputs. So the value is going to equal data.email. And then the on change is going to set the data and change the email to the e.target.value. And then same exact thing here for password. Okay, now both of these inputs, we are getting the state from what the user is typing. And we are not using Axios for this specific file. The reason why is because NextAuth provides us a sign-in function that we could import in here. So the next thing we are going to do is we are going to make sure everything is set up inside of the backend of the login API. Okay, so I just wanted to check to make sure the login page, everything looks good, the console looks good, and it says sign in with email, password, and sign in. Perfect. So like I said, we are going to start working on the back end, but before we do that, we are still in the front end client page, login page. I just want to remove this right here, the action and post. We're going to have an on submit, and we're going to have a login user as a function. And then we need to create this function. So it's going to be a arrow function with e.prevent default, and then let's just close it. That's all we're doing for now. Let's make sure the page looks good. Refresh it. Everything looks good. No console log errors as well. Okay, perfect. So now let's actually start working on the backend API of the login. So this is how we're going to authenticate the user. And this is the main part of the whole tutorial. So to authenticate user with the login, you could either do it during Google, GitHub, or you could do it with the credentials provider. Right now, we're working on the credentials provider, and that is the most difficult one to do. So to do it, you have to do it inside the catch-all route, which is in the route.jsx file. Inside of it, where you do all the logic and authentication, is inside of this authorized function. So right now, all we have is a static user named Brett with the email at brett@gmail.com. We just created the register API endpoint and we made it functional. So now we could actually register users. So we don't need the static user anymore. What we need here is we need checks to make sure that everything is checking right and make sure everything's right before the user logs in. So for example, if somebody's trying to sign in, they need to make sure they type in the email and password. If they don't, we need to throw an error. We need to also make sure that that email is in our database so they can actually log in with that account. Another thing is we need to compare the passwords so that these passwords match. And if they do match, we can log them in. And if they don't match, we are going to throw an error saying the passwords do not match. So first, we are going to remove this static user. And let's give us some space. And let's do a comment saying we're going to check to see if email and password is there. That's what we really want to check. So we're going to say if there's no credentials.email or there's no credentials.password, we're going to throw a new error saying missing fields. We could obviously change the error message to whatever. We could say, please enter an email and password. So that means that is the first check they have to pass. It's like almost like in sequential order. So they got to check this check, and if they pass that check, they get to go to the next check. So this is the first check. Very simple, right? So the next check we're going to do is, okay, they typed in their information correctly. Now we want to see if the user actually exists, if they're actually logging in with the registered user. So to do that, we are going to say const user equals await, and then we have a Prisma function saying find unique. That means we are going to go in our database and we're going to find that email and make sure it matches up with the sign-in email as well. So it's going to be passing an object with the where object, and we're going to look for the email of the credentials email, and we're going to try to match them up. So let's close this up. And then after that, we need to do a check. So we're going to say if user doesn't exist. So if no user was found, actually, we'll say that if no user was found. So if we look through the database and we don't find a user, we need to run this specific check and throw an error at this specific client. So we're going to say if there is no user, or we're going to also say if the user doesn't have a hashed password. Reason why is because we're going to have users in our MongoDB database that just have password. And the reason why is because if you look at the schema.prism, there's not a hashed password for the account, right? Hash password up here is optional. So if somebody signs in with the GitHub or Google, they don't have a hash password, so how are we going to authenticate them when they log in? We don't. So that's why we need to check that as well. So we're going to say if there's no user dot hashed password, right? So if we don't have a user or the user does not have a hashed password, we are going to throw a new error saying no user found. I mean, if you're logging in with a GitHub provider, you always log in clicking the GitHub provider button. You do not log in here. So that's why we have to throw this hashed password error as well. So that's for that. And then the next check we do is if we do find the user and the user does exist, they will pass this check. And that means we're going to check next to see if the passwords match. So we're going to check to see if the passwords match. And the way we do this is we have to use bcrypt's compare function. So to do that, we have to import bcrypt at the top. So we're going to import bcrypt from bcrypt. So we could use the compare function and method. So we are right here. We are going to do const passwords match, and we're going to await the bcrypt.compare. And the first parameter, we are taking the password that the user actually typed on the sign-in form, and then we're comparing it to the hashed password in our database. So then we need to check right after this, saying if passwords don't match. So if they don't match and they typed in the wrong password, we're going to say if the passwords match is not true, that means they typed in the wrong password, we're going to throw a new error saying incorrect password. And we're going to close it right there. So that means that they pass all these checks. That means they actually logged in with a user that is in the database. So after that, we are just going to return the user. So right here is all the functionality from lines 27 to line 54, about 27 lines of code to actually verify to make sure that this user is in the database and to log them in and to authenticate the user during a login process. So now I want to test out this code right here that we just made to make sure I can actually log in successfully. So if we go to the login page, we have to connect that backend code, right, to this front-end client side right here. And like I said before, we can't use Axios because NextAuth provides us a sign-in function that allows us to use. So we must import that at the top. So what we're going to do is we're going to import sign-in, and this is going to be from NextAuth/React. So we're going to have to use this sign-in function here instead of Axios. So to do that, it's going to look exactly like this. We're going to sign in the credentials with the credentials of the backend, and then we are going to pass in the data through a spread syntax. So data, and then we're going to have a comma, and then redirect will be false. And if you don't have redirect as false, it is going to redirect you to a pre-built NextAuth page that we don't need to use. So we're going to have that there. We're going to close this, and then we could close this as well for now. Obviously, we're going to have then and catch statements in a little bit, but we'll do that one after we test this out correctly. We can actually do a .then for now, and we could just say alert user has been logged in. So that would actually alert us as saying, hey, we're logged in, and we could just check the cookies to make sure we're logged in as well. And we could go on the home page and see what it renders for a user. So let's check this code. We are running. Let me just reset the development server just in case. Let me go back to my localhost 3000. I will refresh the page. And we are just going to use the registered user that I already registered. So as we remember, it's brett@gmail.com. And then the password was 123456778. So we're going to do brett@gmail.com. Let me just switch to the network tab. And then we're going to do 123456778. We're going to sign in, and it says user has been logged in. We can make sure too by looking at the application. We do have a NextAuth session token. That's where all the session data is, and we could access the information. And then I could just go to localhost 3000. Minimize this real quick, and then it says username Brett, and then brett@gmail.com. And this is the account that I just logged in and registered through MongoDB. So that means everything is working how it should. Okay, now I want to download and install a package onto our application, which is React Hot Toast. So React Hot Toast is going to give us toast notifications. So these are professional looking notifications if somebody logs in successfully or an error occurs. You can do alerts like we've been doing. So if you don't want to do this step, you could skip this and just go to the next step. Everything is timestamped as well. So the package we are going to install is npm install react-hot-toast. And the way this works is we need to wrap our whole application with the provider. and it's going to be like a toaster provider. So to do that, instead of going to the layout, we need to go inside our context folder, create a new file called toaster context.jsx or whatever you want. And then inside of this, we are going to mark it as a use client. And then we are going to import toaster from React Hot Toast. We're going to create a function called toaster context. And then we are going to return the toaster. And toaster is a self-closing tag. So it's going to look exactly like that. We will close this. And then let's export it so we could use it inside of our layout file. So now we are going to go to our layout file. And inside the layout file, we have to self-close tag this so it wraps around all the children. So we will import toaster context from context/toaster. And then we could put it right behind this first provider. And it's, like I said, it's a self-closing tag. So just like that. So now that allows us to use toast notifications throughout our whole application. So the first page I want to do it on is the register page. So if we go to register, oops, that's the API. Close your API folder. Go to the front end. We're going to go to the register page, and instead of alert, we will do toast.success, and then it says user has been registered. Cool. So that's if this works, this API endpoint works, then we're going to send this notification. And if it doesn't, we should send a toast.error. Something went wrong. Perfect. So that's that toast right here for notifications. And now let's implement it for the login page. So for the login page, it is a little bit different. The reason why is because for the then, we are going to take the parameter of callback. So when we use the signIn function with NextAuth, it is giving us callback options and properties. So this is the property we're going to use, and then we're going to call an arrow function, and then we are going to do an if statement. So we're going to say if there is a callback error. So if there is a callback error, we want to run the toast.error and whatever the callback.error is. So for example, the callback.error is going to be whatever we put inside of our backend code right here with this error. So if they didn't enter their email and password, it'll throw this error. If they didn't have no user found in their database, it's going to enter this error. If it was an incorrect password, it'll enter that error. That would only work if you pass in the callback.error. So then that's if it fails. So we're going to say that. Let me see where this code ends. Then. Okay. And then we're going to have another if statement inside of the then. So if there is a callback.okay and there is no callback error, we are going to run a toast success message. So we are going to say toast success logged in successfully. So that is all we have done so far for toast notifications. Now we need to test them out. So to test them out, let's start our development server. And I'm going to register a completely new user. So we're going to go to the home page and see if we're still logged in. So technically we're still logged in. I will inspect the page, go to application, delete all of these for now. Obviously there's an easier way to log out, but that's just going to be what we're doing for now. We are going to go to /register. And then on the register page, let's register a new person. So we could do Tom, and then tom@gmail.com, and then we'll do the same password, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, And before I click this, we should get inside of the register page, user has been registered, if everything worked correctly, and then if it didn't, something went wrong. So we will click register, and we have one error. Toast is not defined, and it's because we didn't import toast at the top. So let's open up our VS Code again, and we didn't. So we just can't use toast without importing it. So let's make sure we have it on the top of both pages. So here's the register page, import toast. Login page, we imported toast. Okay, cool. So let's go back and let's try again. So we register, something went wrong. Where's the network tab? We have a 500 error. Let me try to refresh it and try it with a different user. Let me make sure that user actually didn't get registered. And it did. So the reason why we got an error is because when I did submit the register, it gave me an error that toast wasn't defined, but still submitted our user. So let me delete him real quick. Tom@Gmail. Now we only have that one user. Let me go back to localhost, refresh the page, and let's register again. Tom@gmail.com. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then let's register. And it says user has been registered. And we get a 200 OK post request. And we see all of the information of the user we just created in our MongoDB database. Let's just confirm it with MongoDB as well. And we have a brand new user right here. Cool. So now I want to go to the login page. So /login. And we are going to log in now with this user, tom@gmail.com. And it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we'll sign in. And right now we are not getting any notifications popping up, but it looks like we are logged in. Let me see. And we are logged in. And you could tell we're logged in by just going back to the home page, and we have Tom and then Tom at email. So the only thing that's not working is the toast notifications for the login page, and let's fix that right now. Okay, so let's fix this toast error problem that we have, and let's just look back at the code and where the problem is actually happening. So we don't have the sign out button, so let's delete all these tokens, refresh the page, make sure we're signed out, and it says null. Perfect. Let's go to our login page again. So we're prepared to log back in. And let's look at the code for the toast. So we're on the login page. Let's review this code and make sure everything is good. We have the sign in function, signing in the credentials, API provider. We're using all of the data, which is the email and password. The redirect is false. If it's true, then we are doing the callback. And if there's an error, we're doing a toast.error.callback error. And then we're saying if the callback is okay, and there is a callback error, which if there is no callback error. So that's the issue right there. It should be the issue. So if there is no callback error, then we do toast.success logged in successfully. Because we were saying if it was okay and there was an error, then you run this. So it didn't make any sense. So let's try it again, and hopefully that is what fixes the code. So let's do tom@gmail.com. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sign in. And it says logged in successful. So that is why there was an error not popping up with the toast notifications. Now let's just make sure all of the error messages are working correctly too. So let's delete everything, refresh the page. And let's do a tom@gmail.com. And let's just give some random password. Like we forgot our password and we're trying to guess. So we try to sign in, incorrect password. Perfect. Okay, so let's do this. And then let's do an email that's not even part of the database. So tom23@gmail.com. No user found. So it's checking it in sequential order. So if it's checking the user first, and then if the user is good, then it's going to check the password. But if the user is not good, it's going to throw that right off the bat. And then if we don't have anything in this field, the email address, you can't see it. So if you don't have anything in the password, it says please fill out this field, and that is from the @tailwindcss/forms package that we installed when we created this template. So that's that check right there. So it looks like everything is working pretty good, and everything is actually working how it should. So the next step is we actually need to create a dashboard for the client, and we also need to set up the Google provider, and we need to set up the GitHub provider as well. Okay, so first we will set up the GitHub provider. What we are going to do is we are going to set up a button below the sign in, or you could do it on the register account. We'll just do it on the login page. You can do whatever you want for your application, but we're going to set up a button below saying to log into GitHub, and then you click the button, and then it'll authorize you to log into GitHub and then authenticate you as well. So to do that, let's just first go into our code, and inside of the catch-all route, as you can remember, in the GitHub provider, we have a client ID and a client secret that we have not got yet. So to get it, we need to go on github.com. So if we go to github.com, obviously, if you don't have an account, sign up for an account, and if you do, log into your account. At the top right, you have a down arrow, click settings. Inside of the settings, we are going to go all the way to the bottom left to developer settings, OAuth apps, new OAuth app. The application name is going to be NextAuth. We could do practice. The homepage URL is going to be your localhost 3000. We don't need a description, and the callback is just going to be wherever you wanted to call back. We could just do localhost 3000. Okay, so we're going to register the application, and it's going to give us a client ID, and then we need to generate a new client secret. So let's just copy this client ID because we do need it. So we're going to copy it, go inside of our env file. I think it was called GitHub_ID. Cool. So we are going to name a variable called GitHub_ID. And this is going to equal that client ID. I think the other one is called GitHub_secret, and this will be that secret key. Yep, secret. Cool. So now we need to get the secret key by clicking generate a new client secret key. We got to confirm our password. And then after you confirm the password, knowing it's you, here's the secret. We could copy it, minimize the page, paste it here, and now we have the GitHub ID and the secret. Cool. Now we are going to go to the login page, and we are going to come all the way down below the sign in button underneath the form. We are going to just do an H1. It's not going to look pretty. And we're going to say sign into GitHub below. Then we'll have a button. And then we'll just say sign in. And then let's just style it just real quick. Class name, BG black, text white. And then we could just do width. We could do width full. Let's see how that looks. Okay. So there's the GitHub sign in. Obviously I spelled whatever in the H1 wrong. Sign into GitHub, and then there's that. Now we need to on-click on this button. So the on-click, we're going to have an anonymous function that's pointing to the sign in function that allows us to use it inside of NextAuth. So sign in, and then we are just going to do a string called GitHub. So this is all you need to do for a basic understanding of how to sign into your GitHub account. So after we do that, this should work, but let me just restart the development server just in case. And then we're gonna do npm run dev. Go back and we're gonna refresh this localhost 3000/login. After it's refreshed, we'll click sign in. And as you can see now, it's trying to authorize this account. We will click authorize bwestwood11, which is me. And then technically we're signed in. We can expect the page application. We have a session token. And we could just go to the localhost 3000. And then there's the name, email, and then it's client-side render, stuff like that. And that is the email associated with my GitHub. So now we could check our MongoDB database, and since we signed in, we should have an account. So now we have an account with our GitHub provider as the provider, type is OAuth, and we have all these properties too. But then if you look in the user, it is also in the user as well right here. So like what we did in the Prisma schema, we did a one-to-many relations between the user and account schema. That's why I said all of the users, no matter what provider they use, will be in the database under the collection user. So that is why this looks like this. And like I said, with the no hashed password in the code earlier for the login logic, as you see, the GitHub provider doesn't have a hashed password field. So we can't use this email to sign in with the credentials provider. It only could be signed in with the GitHub provider. Okay, so now let's set up the Google provider. So to set up the Google provider, we also need the client ID and client secret. We are going to go to Google and you're going to search Google Cloud Console. Click the first link and then your page should look something like this. You should be logged into your Google account, the top right. We're going to down click this and we're going to click new project. You can name your project whatever you want, YouTube Next Auth, and then just click create. So now it's creating your project. We could select the project, and then we could just go to API and services. And then after we click API and services, we need the OAuth consent screen. We need to create one. So this is like the screen that pops up when you want to sign in with a specific Google account. It's on a lot of websites. You've probably seen it before. So for this consent screen, we have to actually go to the right one. I don't know why I was on that one. So YouTube-next-auth, make sure you're in the right project. And then it's going to prompt you to a few questions on what you should do. So we are going to make sure it's external, so it's available to any test user with any Google account. We need an app name, so we're just going to YouTube Next Auth. Support email is going to be auto-populated for you, so click that. You can skip all of this, and then your developer contact information, you could just do the same email as well. It is required. Press save and continue. The scopes, you could add or remove scopes. You could click the first three, this one, and this one. Click update. Then we're going to click save and continue. You don't need to add any test users, so save and continue. This is just a summary of everything we did, so you're going to go back to the dashboard. After you're back at the dashboard, we are going to create some credentials. So click the credentials tab. Make sure you're in the right project. Click create credentials. Now you're going to click OAuth client ID. Application type is going to be a web application. You can keep this name as is, it's not a big deal. And authorized redirects, we are going to do, okay, so for the authorized redirect URI, we are going to do http://localhost 3000/API/auth/callback/Google. And then we're just going to click create. So now it gives you the client ID and client secret that we need for our project. So for this, we are just going to copy the client ID, go back into our VS Code, and we're going to make sure it's named correctly. So it's Google ID and Google secret. So we're going to have Google underscore ID. That's what we just copied. And then Google underscore secret. Go back to that OAuth consent. This is the client secret. Copy that and paste it. And now we have the keys ready for our Google authentication. Okay, so now let's create the button so we can actually log into our Google provider. All we needed was the ID and secret, which we just got. And I am on the login page on the client side. And we have the sign in to GitHub below with the button. I am just going to copy and paste this down. I could just do background of green instead. Say sign into Google below. And then we are just changing the string on a click from GitHub to Google. And we're having this sign in function from NextAuth. So we could test this out. We can go back to our localhost 3000. Let's go to the application and let's just log out of all of our stuff by deleting the cookies. We will go to /login. Nothing wrong in the console. And then it says sign into Google below. Did I copy? Something's not popping up right. Let's check the code again because the button doesn't look like it's right there. I guess BG green is actually not a background. So let's try it again. BG red 500 I know is one. Okay. So there's our sign in with Google. If we click that, we should be able to sign in with a Google account. So we click it, and as you can see, we sign in with the Google. I could just do this one right here. And now we are technically signed in. We can inspect the page. Look at the application. We have 3 tokens again. We can go to the localhost 3000. And here is my name, Competitive Edge, email competitive.edge.tampa@gmail.com. So we are successfully logged into Google. Let's just make sure our MongoDB has that information as well. If we go to account, now we have 2 accounts. We have one with the provider of GitHub and one with the provider of Google. And then if we look at the users, we have the Competitive Edge in here as well. So everything is working as it should. Now you can sign in and register with authentication with the Google provider, the GitHub provider, and the credentials provider. The last thing I want to do is I want to show you how you can protect a page if a user is logged in or not. There's multiple ways to protect pages when it comes to NextAuth, but I am going to show you just one example of how you can do it, and then you could pick from the docs of which ones you want, but the code is pretty simple and straightforward. So if we are on a client-side page, you have to use a client-side method to do this. So for example, if we go to the login page, we are on the login page, it is a use client page. I am going to also import the use effect because we're going to use that. And I am going to call the use effect function right above, the use effect hook right above the login user. So we're going to have a use effect, and this use effect is going to be an arrow function. And inside of the code block, we're going to say if the session, which is the object we're getting, dot status, my fault. If the session dot status equals authenticated, then we want to do something, which means we want to actually push the user away from this page because they're already logged in, and we want to push them to the dashboard. So there's a few other imports we're going to import real quick. First, we are going to import the use router from next/navigation, not router. Another thing we want to import is we want to import use session, and we could import it right with the sign-in function right here. So we need to actually get the session from the client side. So we could do a const session equals use session, and that's going to allow us to get the session if it isn't. And then if the session status is authenticated, we do want to do a router.push, but we need to actually initialize use router. So const router equals use router, and then we're going to say router.push, and then we're going to push it to the dashboard. That means we are logged in and we don't need to be on this page anymore. So this is one way to protect a page, and the page we're protecting is the login page if we are logged in and authenticated. So let me just terminate the development server real quick, restart the development server. Let me open up a new localhost 3000. We are technically logged in right now. Let me inspect it real quick. I could just delete the cookies, refresh the page. All right, we're going to go to /login, and we could log in with the tom@gmail, and then we can do a password of 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. We will sign in, logged in successful, and then it's pushing us to the dashboard page, which I have not created. I thought I did. So we could just create a new folder called dashboard. And then inside the dashboard, we're going to have a page.jsx. Let's name it use client at the top. Let's import use session. And this is going to be from NextAuth/React. Then we could just do a arrow function. Remove this. Call this dashboard. If I could type. And then right above the return, we have to create a session variable using the useSession hook. And what we could do here is we could just say h1 dashboard, and then we could do a p tag, and then we could say hi, and then session dot, it'll be a question mark dot user dot name, or we could just do email. Perfect. And this is going to get the session, import session, we have the data. Okay, cool. So now if we go back to this page, let's try to go back to the login. Page is not defined. It says cannot read properties, reading of null. Reason why is because it is client side, so it is taking a few milliseconds to solve. So technically the email is null. So I do have to put a question mark in front of this as well. And it looks like it's not working. And it's not working, it's because we are not, I see why it's not working. It's because when you do this, we are actually getting the data from the session. So we have to create this as an object, and we have to write this as session like this. So let's go back to the code. And now it says hi tom@gmail.com. Okay, so let's redo that whole process again. And let's actually create the sign out button as well. So we are going to import sign out from this Next Auth. And let's have a button right here. We will say sign out. And this will be an on click. Anonymous function. Sign out. And we're just going to, no parameters are going to be passed in. It's just going to sign out the current user. Okay. So let's go back. Click sign out. And now there's no user, even if we refresh it. Let's go to the login. And if there is no user, we could stay on the login page. So we're going to do tom@gmail.com. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're going to sign in. It's going to say we logged in successfully, push us away from that page, and bring us to the dashboard saying hi tom@gmail.com. We click sign out, and now we're not logged in anymore. Even if we go to the localhost 3000, it will give us nulls. So that is a lot of information I know to digest, especially in one video, but everything will be timestamped. It did take me a while to learn all of this stuff as well, so don't get frustrated if you're watching this video. But I feel like this information to authenticate users for your application is a very useful skill to have. So if you did like this video, hit that like button and also subscribe for more content like this. That would help me get out more content, also motivate me as well. So thank you for everything, and also have a good day.